Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday Space Show evening program, West Coast time. A little bit early tonight, but we offer our Tuesday time at a couple of different time options, and the guests can select that time. Because it gets late for some people on the East Coast, if we're starting at 10 and maybe finishing around midnight, that's a big ask to ask. So welcome to our program, and Bob Zimmerman is our guest. And I have a couple of quick announcements coming up. Uh, Doug Messier is with us on Hotel Mars tomorrow regarding his perspective in news on Starship. And then there is no program, as I've explained, on Friday. And Sunday is an open line show. And this chap right here, John Hunt of Fort Worth, Texas, is our guest on Tuesday. He's going to analyze and comment on all the UFO, UAP material being dispersed by the government. And he's a true believer, so you will get his perspective, but he does acknowledge that there's not much coming with it. We need a lot more, but we won't do that on Bob's time. So all of you know Bob. I'm not going to spend time saying much about him other than he has a terrific website. You probably should be checking it several times a day, behindtheblack.com. And it's great to have Bob back on the show again. And welcome. How are you doing since Sunday?
I'm doing pretty good, David. I still think I reign as your most frequent guest over the 20 some odd years
Yeah.
years
Well,
you've been
that
doing
is
the space
true. And
show.
you actually computed it at one time, and you were so far ahead of anybody else but I don't think we've computed it since then. But nobody comes on 4 times a year. And with our new program with Zoom, and you can join other shows, like pretty much the Sunday show could have been at least a partial Bob Zimmerman show.
No, I controlled myself. I wasn't the only
But
speaker by any
you were on
means. No.
you had a lot of airtime. But anyway, Bob, what's been going on in space since Sunday?
Well, we have news, and once again, you had said in your announcement about the Zoom's invite that people should check my website beforehand because there'll be a test. Well, I don't know if there'll be a test, but there was news today. NASA held a press conference. It included Isaacman again, and this was an announcement of outlining more details about his reshaped lunar lander slash lunar base Artemis program. As he had said in earlier announcements, he wants to accelerate the number of lunar landers, unmanned as well as manned, but unmanned significantly, talking about having like 20 in the next year or so. And that number seems really unrealistic, but today's conference was outlining some specifics. And so they went into the details and they announced some contract awards. So I'm going to go down the schedule. It's on Behind the Black in detail, including a map of their proposed lunar base. Unfortunately, I don't know where this is. This map is from one of the view graphs during the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation. But I tried to find this at the lunar South Pole, and I could not find this particular spot. It does not look like the crater in the image is Shackleton. So I'm not sure exactly where this is relative to the South Pole. I would love to have known. Sadly, none of the press people at the conference asked that question, which disappointed me no end. So anyway, they outlined the plan. And so the plan is first of all, the first three missions in this plan are already scheduled and already have contracts. And we've been waiting. The first one, they're calling it now Moonbase 1. This is Blue Origin's Blue Moon Mark 1 Endurance Lander that's already scheduled to launch before the end of the year. In the fall, they say now. It's going to land on the rim of Shackleton. Um, and they're going to, it's going to do work there in that area. Um, and the idea, of course, is they say is to quote, to reduce risk for future crewed Artemis landings in 28. That's in the fall of this year. The second mission, Moonbase 2, also has been in the works for a very long time. That's Astrobotic's Griffin lander before the end of 26, they now say. It's going to bring in about more than 1,000 pounds of cargo, including Astrolab, that's a different startup that has its small unmanned flip rover that it wants to demonstrate the capabilities of its rover technology. And that ties into later missions. I'll get to that. Griffin was first proposed in 20. It was supposed to land originally in 23. It's been delayed repeatedly over the years. We're now getting near the end of 26, and they say by the end of 26, that's going to land. Then the third mission, which has also been contracted before previously, is also by the end of this year. Intuitive Machines Trinity lunar lander is another Nova C lander. It will include payloads from Europe and South Korea as well as NASA payloads. It's going on a different part of the moon, not near the South Pole. So that's also supposed to go before the end of this year. Those are all three that have already been on the schedule, and we'll see if they all get off before the end of the year. Let's hope. Then they announced two contract awards to three different companies. They announced a lunar lander, two different lunar lander contract awards to Blue Origin, totaling $188 million to land two of their Mark 1 unmanned landers in 28 in the South Pole region. So Blue Origin gets two more contracts. And on top of that, those two missions are to land new contracts to both Astrolab and Lunar Outpost. Both Astrolab and Lunar Outpost have been trying to win contracts for manned lunar rovers. Astrolab was going to send Flip unmanned on Astrobotic's Griffin to try to demonstrate its capabilities. So they are both competing for the larger manned contract. Well, they both have now won a contract. Astrolab's is for $219 million, and Lunar Outpost gets $220 million for its rover. These are both manned rovers that can work autonomously. Blue Origin will, in two different missions, send each to the South Pole region. And NASA wants to get at least one launched and landed in the South Pole so that its 28 Artemis 4 lunar landing will be able to use it. The astronauts will have it to use. So that's the plan in 28. Also in 28, they are now talking about a contract with Firefly to use its Blue Ghost lander to send 4 hoppers to the moon, to the South Pole region. This would be a mission. I'm sorry, I'm moving my camera. I got to read my thing. They're calling this Moonfall, and it's managed by JPL. It'll use Blue Ghost to bring 4 hoppers. They're calling them drones because they're autonomous, but they are hoppers. They're not drones. They can't fly with helicopters. There's no atmosphere, but they're hopping, and they're going to send them to the South Pole region. And this is really interesting. Those drones are going to lay out the perimeter of the planned lunar base. The wording here is very specific during the talk, and I found that really intriguing. The agency said, now that's the planned mission so far. They also threw out, in 27, Blue Origin's Mark II manned lunar lander. Its first demo mission, unmanned, will take now NASA's Viper rover to the moon. That's in 27. Now, Viper had been canceled, but apparently they decided to bring it back to life, and they're going to use Blue Origin's unmanned, manned lunar demo mission to fly it. And that's going to go to the South Pole as well. So that's the missions unmanned that they've laid out. They said that they plan to award a lot more contracts for unmanned missions in June, and then again later in the fall, because as the officials said during the talk, they have a plan for as many as 21 launches for 25 landings in this first phase of their 3-phase lunar base program. Now, this program, the schedule as I've outlined, all taking place, all these missions, which is what, 7 different landers, all taking place before 28 or by 28. That's very ambitious. And I say it's kind of similar to Elon Musk's schedule, which means we should not be surprised or disappointed if things don't happen as scheduled. It should not be disappointed at all. But they're pushing very, very hard. And I would say once again that Isaacman, this is the most coherent lunar exploration plan put forth by NASA since the 1960s. And what's really important about it is that it is asking NASA is asking the private sector to do the job. Almost nothing here except some science instruments is being built by NASA. The launch facility, the rockets, the landers, and the rovers are all being made by private companies. And that's, I think, the plan down the road. And so this is very good. And now finally, my one perspective about this that was really intriguing was those hoppers, the four hopper mission. It appeared very clearly, and there was even a question to Isaacman about this, and he sidestepped it. These hoppers appear designed to actually place American claim to as much territory in the South Pole region as it wants for its lunar base. This is notwithstanding the Outspace Treaty that bans claiming territory. And Isaacman very clearly understands that possession is nine-tenths of the law, regardless of any treaty. And so he's moving as fast as he can to establish that possession on the south pole of the moon by having these drones fly in 28. I'm sorry, not yeah, in 28 to try to lay out the territory we want to use for our lunar base. Now, what's interesting about this is because that map I posted on Behind the Black did not specify exactly where on the South Pole region this is, I don't know how this conflicts with China's Chang'e 7 lunar lander, which is supposed to land on the rim of Shackleton Crater sometime before the end of this year. And so I don't know how these two conflict. I really tried very hard to find out where on the South Pole this map was, and I just could not pin it down. They did not give any information, and sadly, no one asked. So that's the overall story. It once again indicates Isaacman is continuing his policy of very clearly reshaping NASA, using the carte blanche Congress gave him, but doing it in such a way not to ruffle feathers. He's being very careful, even though he's establishing plans that are going to eventually ruffle feathers. He's setting himself up so when he finally ruffles the feathers, they won't get ruffled because he will be doing other things that will be more significant and more satisfying. That's my sense of that mission, and it's kind of exciting. It does appear good. The most important thing to me, once again, is relying entirely on the private sector to do it. That's really the important thing. No more NASA building Vipers flying, but Vipers are leftover. Everything else is privately built.
Are they funding any of these missions? And every one of these private missions, some of them have made an effort to get to the moon and have not succeeded. None of them have a track record of having succeeded yet.
Well, but Firefly has a track record success. Blue
Firefly
Ghost
does,
landed.
and Intuit Machine partially has
Yeah,
a.
but I would consider Turing Machine to be a partial success, at least demonstrated it could
So
land.
does he say that this is a high risk program? Does he?
They didn't say that.
Everyone to succeed?
No, I would say that he did not say that. He did not say that, but it's I think understood this is a high risk program. I mean, he's relying remarkably highly on Blue Origin to get its act together and get things done. That I thought was interesting. And then I want to mention one last thing. One name did not come up anywhere in the press conference, in any of this discussion, in any of these contract awards. The name was SpaceX. Starship was not mentioned in the slightest. And that is not a knock on SpaceX. This indicates that SpaceX hasn't been focused on lunar landing at this moment in time. And so they're sending the contracts to other people, and that's great. That's the way it should be. But SpaceX was not involved in any of these awards. This is the unmanned portion of the program. And Blue Origin is trying to put itself in a good position to win these contracts, and it's obviously succeeded. Now, the money is there. Hey, Isaacman has said this repeatedly. He doesn't need the extra money Congress wants to give him and has going to give him. He says he can do it with the money that's at NASA. It just has to be used more intelligently. And so, meanwhile, Congress is going to give him a lot more money. And the money that Congress is giving him is not going as much to the science departments as it used to. It's going to exploration. So he'll have the money to do this, and he's awarding the contracts.
Anyone want to comment? I'll open it up for everybody.
Yeah, I'd love to hear feedback, thoughts on this. I don't know if anyone else saw the press conference or read their paperwork, but it is really interesting. What I find interesting is he says 25 launches and 20 landings by 28. And I don't know how that's going to, I still don't know how that's going to be possible. We're talking about 7 landings here, and 2 of them he's relying on Blue Origin to move fast. And fast and Blue Origin have not been put together much in any conversation for the last 2 decades. And
Where,
I keep hoping David Limp, the CEO, will make that happen. And there's been indications he's trying. For example, when they had the launch failure earlier this month with New Glenn trying to put AST Space Mobile into orbit, I said at that time, it will be an opportunity for David Limp and Blue Origin to prove that they're getting their act together because they should recover from this very, very fast. It shouldn't take them 6 months to a year. They should be launching within 3 months. And lo and behold, they're right now targeting their next New Glenn mission for early June.
were there
Um,
any were there any reps of the companies there at the press conference?
They might have been, but they didn't ask them any questions or have them speak. What they did do during the press conference, which I thought was very tacky, is whenever they announced the contract award, they would cut to a quickie video by the company with dramatic music and quickie visuals, and that was just basically blather and PR and kind of tacky. Um, but then what can you do? That's the world today. Everybody has a soundtrack in their lives nowadays. Everything is dramatic music. And and I was on Bachelor. I did it when I taped Bachelor today for tomorrow night. He asked me at one point, he was talking about how all the young people at SpaceX cheering during Friday's Starship 12 mission. And he said, um, didn't they do that? Big space companies ever done that in the past? He's trying to imply that big space companies don't have young people and are never enthusiastic. And I said to him, well, you got to understand that in the 60s, cheering or clapping during any of these missions was considered very inappropriate. You were supposed to stay focused on your job. You were not supposed to get emotional. You're supposed to be stay calm. And almost never during any launch, landing, any Apollo operation, Gemini operation, did anyone cheer. The one exception to that I'm very aware of, that I can't think of any other exceptions, was the Apollo 11 landing. After Neil Armstrong landed, they handed out cigars and they were cheering with flags, but that was an exception, not the rule. So the culture of the old space companies back in the 60s was to stay calm and not cheer, stay focused on what you need to do, and there's something to be said for that. However, nowadays the old space companies they don't just cheer. They don't cheer, but then they don't have any young enthusiasm going on. So to a certain extent, let's have them cheering in the modern companies with young people. That's a good thing.
Joe,
Um,
you have your hand up?
yeah. Did someone have the hand up?
Yeah, Joe does.
Yeah, I think I might know where the map that he showed is.
Oh, I want to know. I want to know. Tell me.
Because I called up a map of Shackleton Crater area, and there is a sort of at about I want to say the 8 o'clock position from Shackleton Crater. There's a field of craters that looks pretty similar to the one that it's up on the rim, and it looks like the area is mostly flat, but there's a bunch of craters there.
I
And
think I know. I'm going to go to my quick quick uh,
If you
the
guys
lunar
want to
reconnaissance
screen
orbiter
share,
map, which is I think is where you're at. And I'm going to look quickly. I think I know where you're talking, but I could not find.
but it doesn't look like it's an exact match for the craters, but on the other hand, this is a lower resolution map that I'm looking at than the one that he showed.
All right.
So
Well,
I
I'm
don't.
going to the lunar reconnaissance
Yeah,
quick.
this is an LRO. This is an LRO. Oh no, this is a lunar prospector, I think.
All right. Well, I'm looking at Luna. I'm looking at Luna reconnaissance orbiter, and what I did not do is zoom in as much as I maybe should have. But then again, I have zoomed into the area you're talking about, that flat area to the lower left.
It's sort of the southwest. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's not south. We don't know. No, it's to the lower left.
yeah. I don't
And
actually know my
and it's a
direction.
bright area that's kind of flat. There's a lot of craters. I've
It's
zoomed
also
into that.
it's
But
also at the same elevation as the rest of the crater rim, so
yes.
that would be a good place to enter the crater from.
Yeah, I do not though see, I'm looking at the LRO images, And I went through this this afternoon. I went crazy. I don't see anything that matches the crater pattern in the map that they posted today. And that's, once again, the variables here are so gigantic, it's going to be hard to pin it down. So I really would love it at some point if we can find this out. I'm looking, Joe. I don't see anything to match. It looks, I had a suspicion this is not Shackleton itself, because if it was, they would have said so. But
Well, they
I don't.
said on the rim of Shackleton crater, right? And
No, no, no. In the discussions, the only time they mentioned Shackleton Crater Rim was when they mentioned specifically, um, what do you call it? The first blue. Let me make sure. Oh God, is my website closed off for the moment?
yeah, one of the Blue Origin missions is supposed to go.
Yes, the very first Blue Origin mission will land on the rim of Shackleton Crater, but they then did not mention Shackleton again in discussing this potential lunar base, in discussing the Hopper mission, or in any of the other landers. They did not specify anything. They showed this map, but nothing on the map. And the full picture of the map is bigger. If you look at the actual press conference and the view graphs, I cropped it a little bit, but there was no location name, no crater names anywhere on it. So I don't know. That's one thing. This is a case of NASA being coy, and I wish they would get some better
Well,
information.
they might be doing that deliberately.
Yeah, I think they are doing it deliberately. I think there's
Yeah,
no question of it.
because
And I don't know.
They don't want the Chinese to land right there.
Yeah, that's one. That's a very good point. It could be they're trying to protect their location from the Chinese, but then again, the Chinese have stated where they're landing on their nearest landers, and it doesn't look like their manned mission is going to go to the South Pole. It's almost certainly going to go near the equator. They've already indicated some potential candidate landing sites. So I don't think the threat from the Chinese is large, but I think you're right. That's probably one of the reasons. It's also possibly other reasons as well. They themselves might not have firmed it up, or they said it's not Shackleton. Then a lot of the more ignorant press would say it's a news story. They're not going to the South Pole, and we'd get stupid stuff. And they're trying to avoid that maybe as well.
So do they talk much about what they're going to do when they get there? Like, are the missions? Do they have objectives such as get some ice out of the
Yes.
crater or anything like that?
They did talk about it, but in general, very general terms, but it fits into the overall program. They want to go, most of these missions are going to the South Pole area. Most of them are defined, they're define the territory and the area for the later manned missions and the lunar base. The hoppers are going to do scouting and also define the territory. Once again, I think claiming is an aspect there. The rovers, the unmanned rovers are going to do initial research work, doing the basics. We've talked about this. Look for water, look for evidence of water, look for just the basics of the geology there. Also to test if you can land in this area and do communications and maintain it, the basics of how you need to do things. The manned rover landers that Blue Origin is going to land unmanned, they want to get those there by 28. They said this, they want at least one there so that when the manned landing happens, they'll have a rover available to use. So those are going to do some scouting. They're not going to go very far, though they have a great distance capability, but they're initially going to stay within this region doing scouting and then be there for the lunar landing. That was their plan, Phil. And there was, in general terms, the guy, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But the guy in charge of this program, he talked at the Ignition press conference a month ago at great length, and he did it again here, outlining the overall plan, the three phases for the lunar base, how they're working it out. And the first phase is these scouting missions. By this end of the second, he did talk about this, how by the end of the first phase, they want to be able to have visits by astronauts to this lunar base area and starting to land cargo there. The second phase would be longer stays, more cargo, more infrastructure, including habitations. And the third phase is permanent occupancy by the 30s. That's their overall plan, and that's in the context. So for my thing is, I think that more or less answers it in the vague sort of way they have so far. A lot of this is not science. It is engineering technology, which is what it should be. They're going to try to do science along the way, but the focus here is: can we land? Can we scout? Can we find out how to land men there? Can we learn how to build a base, communications? Can we do all the infrastructure we need to build a lunar base? That's the engineering exploration, and I think that's their focus, which is good. So I don't know if I've answered every question, but that was the big news today. There is another piece of news I did over the weekend. Excuse me, that I mentioned on Sunday, but I should talk about it a little bit more. It is pretty clear. I posted this on Behind the Black on Sunday. Was it Sunday? Yes, it was Sunday. NASA announced in a procurement on May 18th. So this was a little bit wild, and Space News caught it. So that I have to give them credit for finding this. NASA has awarded from 3 to 6 additional crewed Dragon flights to IS. And those additional flights are going to run possibly through 2030. Now, of course, that's what the procurement said, and that's mostly what Space News said. But I looked at that and immediately said, this is the end of Starliner. And it's once again NASA being coy. They did not announce Starliner is dead, but a month ago I broke they very cleverly announced their schedule of dockings for the rest of the year. And lo and behold, there was nothing from Starliner. And their own press announcement about those dockings for this year said that Starliner is under review. But that meant no cargo mission this year as far as on the list. So I said, it's not happening, but they were very coy about it. And so now they announced a procurement adding SpaceX launches a commercial contract, sole source basis, and it's going to run through 2030. Well, ISS is going to be retired in 2030. That's the plan right now. They talk about extending it to 32, but
those are only crew launches, though, right?
I'm talking about this is only crew.
They haven't extended the SpaceX cargo launches that far.
No. This particular was just crew. I'm talking crew, and I'm talking in the context of Starliner and Boeing. They basically are giving SpaceX all the remaining manned missions till 30. This brings in revenue somewhere between another $1 to $2 billion into SpaceX's pocket that Boeing doesn't get. And I think overall, all the additional contracts that SpaceX got that Boeing didn't get over the life of ISS runs in the range of $4 to $6 billion. That SpaceX got that Boeing did not. Now, $4 to $6 billion is a significant percentage of what they've raised in investment capital for Starship Super Heavy. So it's a lot of money. That's revenue, of course. It's not profit, but still, nonetheless. The point here is that we don't know. It does appear that this is once again Isaacman being very coy. He's basically canceling Starliner, I think, because he doesn't want to spend any additional money on it. Boeing doesn't want to spend any additional money on it because it's already lost more than $2 billion on the project. And it's going to be hard for it to make that money back. And so rather than outright say he's canceled it, he's very coyly canceling it without saying so. And this is his pattern, once again, where he's not trying to ruffle any feathers while he organizes NASA to be more efficient and get things done. And once again, he's not going to get a lot of argument about this, but he's not going to bring argument to him. Boeing has been banned basically from bidding on NASA contracts now for almost 6 years. Back in 20, they announced, NASA said, we can't trust any of their contract bids. They've been very bad. But until they get their act straightened out, we're not going to consider any of their bids. And they haven't bid on anything since. And I think that's what's going on here. Now, in terms of crew, I don't know what's going on with cargo, I mean, Joe. I don't know exactly what's going on with that. But I suspect, they might give Boeing a cargo mission down the road. They talked about it, but that they haven't, that they're delaying this can only be attributed to either two reasons. One, Boeing hasn't satisfied NASA about fixing the thruster problems. Or two, Boeing's not willing to spend any more money. Or NASA's not willing to spend any more. It's a third reason. So we'll have to wait and see how it's going to play out. But it does look like Starliner is dead.
Well, NASA's not obligated to spend any more money because they haven't fulfilled the original fixed cost contract, right?
You're absolutely correct.
Right? Like
You're
NASA, until they can actually demonstrate a manned flight that is fully successful.
That's right.
I think they're they're basically not getting any more money from NASA.
Yeah, the situation is that previous administrators and NASA management was very willing to be generous to Boeing in a lot of this manner, getting them extra money when they went over budget. There was actually one case where they threw them an extra 380 something million dollars in a way that was actually some indicated illegal. I'd have to trace it down on Behind the Black, but if you do search for Boeing and NASA contracts related to this particular Starliner, you'll see they got some extra money they shouldn't have. I don't think Isaacman's interested in playing those games anymore. They have to deliver. So they're not, yes, they're not going to get any. Now, the cargo mission, they talked about it as an extra mission. NASA would pay for the cargo because it would be an extra mission. And that would give Boeing a chance to do a demo mission. But I'm suspecting that Isaacman's not really interested in spending money for Boeing in this area. It's not going to be tremendously beneficial to him. And if you look at the overall thing, I think he'd much rather spend that $400 million instead of on a cargo mission with Starliner. He'd rather spend it on two rover missions, which is what he did today, announced today. That's at least how I sense it, trying to read Isaacman's mind. I'm usually pretty good with this, so I could be wrong, but I think that's what's going on. The cargo missions, Dragon's going to keep getting the contracts. They'll get every contract that's needed. But you got Cygnus is going to be launching steadily. There's no question. The Japanese have their missions launched. I know that both the exploration company in France wants to fly a Nix capsule cargo to ISS before it retires, and the European Space Agency is working hard to make that happen. So I think there's more than enough options outside of Boeing right now. And that's, I think, what's going on.
Is there any possible commercial opportunity for Starline someplace in the world?
Well, they have to want to show they want to sell it. And they haven't indicated that. It's kind of one of these situations, I'll use an analogy, a restaurant. You have a restaurant that has bad management. It's going under. No one wants to eat there. There was a walk and roll. There was a Chinese buffet place like this. It went out of business. So another Chinese buffet management comes along, opens in the exact same location, and suddenly they're filled with customers because they're providing food that people want to eat and the management is good. Boeing is the bad restaurant right now that's losing money. Their management is probably not capable of saving the company. They almost have to declare Starliner bankrupt, sell it to somebody else, and let someone else save it. Now, whether there's any commercial possibilities, look, we got 5 commercial space stations. We should talk about that. We got 5 commercial space stations being developed right now, with 3 very robust. And those 3 that are robust, that's Starlab, Vast's Haven, and Axiom, all 3 of them say they think they have the market interest to finance their work, even if they don't get a NASA contract. Well, they're going to need ferrying services back and forth from their station. And so we surely don't want Dragon to have to do it all. It won't be able to. And so there is opportunity for Starliner if Boeing had some sense about the potential here. They've got to launch it, they've got to get it to work properly, and they've got to develop some trust for customers to use it. But they got to do that, and they're not. But there is definitely opportunity there, David. There's no doubt about that. There's going to be a market demand. This is one of the reasons why the exploration company has been pushing so hard and has gotten investment capital in Europe because they see an opportunity here, and no one is taking advantage. Not enough in America are taking advantage of the opportunity.
Other comments or questions?
What about is Dream Chaser totally dead, or is it going to
That's
try
a
to rise?
good question. I would love to know, but I've been saying it looks dead now for about 2 years, based on everything that's happened. All right, NASA's canceled the ISS cargo mission. It's going to give them some money to do an orbital flight, but mostly that orbital flight test and demo mission is on Sierra Space's dime, essentially. And Sierra Space says it's going to do that mission. Now, 4 months ago, it said it was going to do that mission this year, hopefully in the spring, which is kind of over now. They shipped Starliner to the ground testing facility I forget which NASA sent us, forgive me, but one of the NASA centers to do ground testing almost 3 years ago. And they said that they were going to launch it that year. This is in 2024. They were going to launch it that year. So they went to ground testing. Ground testing usually takes about 3 months, 3, 4 months. It usually happens. And that's what seemed to fit their schedule. Silence for years. I kept saying, why are they not saying anything? I even talked to some of their press people. They wouldn't answer. My guess was that the ground testing discovered something fundamentally wrong that needed major work. That was my guess. I don't know that. Subsequently, this year, just about a month ago, they announced finally that it has completed all ground testing, finally, so it's ready for launch. Except usually when you finish ground testing, you then ship to the launch site. You're ready to go. But they didn't. They said instead it's going to be shipped back to their facility in Colorado for additional testing and upgrades. I hear that and I say to myself, aha, there's an issue here. Right now, the last I read is that they're looking at a launch maybe early next year, an orbital mission. That's the last I heard. There might be better information, but that's the last I heard. So is it dead, John? Yeah, I'm reminded of the Monty Python routine of the parrot. That's all I can say. I don't know. It's a tragedy, but Sierra Space in this respect has not done well. There's no doubt about that. And that's like
Maybe it's on life support.
They're supposed to launch on Vulcan Centaur, right?
That was the original plan. Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. But once again,
And
that's a
that's half the
separate
problem.
issue. Yeah, I mean that's a separate issue. But Vulcan has launched, so there's no real reason it could not eventually launch on Vulcan. That's a separate issue. I wouldn't blame this problem. This problem is not on Vulcan. I don't think so at all.
Yeah.
Though we could talk about Vulcan, but I want to talk about Sierra Space, and that swings us back to the space station story. I mentioned five, and for people who read my website know that periodically I post, when there's an update on one of the space stations, I post that update and I include in it my rankings of the space station companies that exist at the moment. And in fact, I did this a few days ago when Starlab got a second major investor. And I rank the 5 companies and I keep updating this ranking with details so we can understand where they stand. So I can presently rank that. And if you go to May 22nd, the Starlab store, you can click on it and you can read the rankings as they presently are. I rank VAST with its Havens 1 and Haven 2 stations as number 1. But I should add right away, the first 3 on this list are pretty much tied. So VAST has gotten no government money. It's going to launch its Haven 1 single module station in 27. It wants to have that up for 3 years and do 4 2-week-long manned missions. It's signed a lot of memos of understanding with a lot of third world countries. So I think that those missions could include third world astronauts as customers. That's the first. Then you got Starlab. Voyager is the lead company in the consortium. It includes Airbus, Northrop Grumman, and Mitsubishi. It also has contracts with ESA. Starlab is interesting. It's not going to be a multi-module station. It's going to launch as a single large module inside Starship. That's their plan. They've got lots of investment capital. They've been signing up their own customers as well, and they have deals with the European Space Agency, which suggests strongly they're trying to market themselves as Europe's potential space station. And then you got Axiom, number 3, which is kind of tied once again with the other 2. They are going to launch. They've done 4 tourist missions to ISS. They got a 5th coming. They've raised a lot of capital. They've had contracts with other countries on those tourist missions. They are building them first few modules right now in Europe to launch attached to ISS. And those modules will stay launched until they can function independent. They would separate and then they have their own station. There are issues, maybe the similar issue. The contractor in Europe is Thales Alenia, which is the same contractor that was building the hull for Gateway. You might remember what's his name? Isaacman pointed out there was corrosion in Gateway on its hull. There are rumors that the first two modules that Thales Alenia was making for Axiom might have some of those same corrosion issues. So there could be a delay. They said they're going to launch their first module in 28. Because they have lots of investment capital and they've got lots of experience, I rank them high in getting their act together. So I'm not as particularly worried. The fourth station in this list is Thunderbird. It's a station being built by a new enter into this race called MaxSpace. They build expandable inflatable modules. They hired a lot of the people, some people from the Bigelow space station team. So they're basically, you consider them to be a next generation Bigelow, taking over for where Bigelow left off. They have actually got a deal with Starlab, a partnership deal, to use those inflatable modules with with some of Starlab's components to build habitable modules on the moon for the lunar base. They proposed that. So Thunderbird is there. They're going to put up their own demo station in 27, and they want to compete for this kind of thing as well. And I rate them number 4 because I think there's reality there, but they're behind. They started later than everybody else. And then this gets us to Sierra Space and Blue Origin. The 5th station on the list is Orbital Reef. This is a partnership between Blue Origin and Sierra Space. Orbital Reef, I consider dead in the water. It's a shame, but it really does appear dead in the water. Nothing's going on. Sierra Space was doing the most. It developed and tested to full scale on the ground its own inflatable modules that would be used on Orbital Reef. It demonstrated that worked. Blue Origin has practically done nothing, as far as we can tell. Nothing. They don't even tout it in any of their press things at any time. I haven't heard a word from them in maybe 2 years. And Sierra Space, even though they tested their life inflatable modules, their failure with Dream Chaser puts a real sour taste on their partnership here. And there were indications over the last few years that the partnership was falling apart, that Sierra Space maybe was dissatisfied with Blue Origin's pace and its contribution. So that's the space station's story, the 5 stations. And Sierra Space this is going back to your question, John, and Dream Chaser. Sierra Space, they are doing lots of stuff, but they've shifted a great deal into the defense market because I think their civilian aspect having to do with Orbital Reef, and as well as Dream Chaser, has not done them very well, and they're not in the picture right now.
Bob, do any of these private stations have a lab capability of competing with the national lab on the ISS?
Competing. There's no competition. The stations are going to beat them out completely because here's the difference. The research done on ISS has generally been useless. And I say that I'm being a little bit overstating when I say it, because of course some of it's good research. But NASA forbids anybody from producing a product for sale after the fact. So all you do is pure research. And at a certain point, that's a dead end. And that's been ISS, a dead end, mostly for the last decade, I'd say. What the private stations are doing is they're making deals with research facility companies that want to use the stations to do research in space, but to do it in a way to produce products for sale on Earth. For example, I'm doing this from memory because I don't have it in my total list here. I think Starlab, yes, it was Starlab. They signed a deal with a company that develops artificial retinas for the eye. That if they could produce them in weightlessness, they could produce retinas, artificial retinas they could put in people's eyes to heal blindness. And this is a company that does this on the ground, but doesn't do it as successfully as it would like, because gravity makes the chemical biology production difficult. So they want to do it on the Starlab station, and they've signed a deal to do this. This is a customer of Starlab. I think similar deals have been made with VAST on its Haven station to do similar kinds of things. Pulmonary medical research as well. Remember, these stations are in a sense a upscaled version of Varda's small capsules, which they're making money on right now, and a lot of investment capital has gone into them because there's profit you can make from the products you produce on the small capsules. Well, the stations are big, and so is it a competition with ISS? No, what it is it's finally going to give us the market that we don't have in space because NASA forbids commercial operations. I'll give you a history story. I've written about this on Behind the Black multiple times. I wrote about it in Leaving Earth as well. Before the Challenger accident, NASA was the only launch facility, but the launch capability was almost free to companies. And so the opportunity to make money in orbit with the shuttle was great. And there were private companies trying to do that. One of which, Charlie Walker, you might remember the name. He was an astronaut, but he was a private astronaut. He worked, and I'm blanking on the company. Forgive me. It's a major company. But he worked for this company developing pharmaceuticals on the shuttle. And they had just done their last test mission. The next flight they were going to launch, produce pharmaceuticals for sale, and they expected to make lots of profit.
I think it was Johnson and Johnson.
No, it doesn't ring a bell. Maybe,
Okay.
but it doesn't ring a bell. But it doesn't matter. The point is, the next flight that they were going to do would start making profit. But before that flight, Challenger happened. And Reagan at that point ended all commercial flights on on the shuttle, and he said the private enterprise should be doing this. And it's true, private enterprise should have been doing it, but because NASA forbid anyone from launching on private rockets, NASA had killed the American launch industry, and it literally took decades for that industry to recover. And so there was no pharmaceutical work in space for decades. It could have been done, Varda is now picking up the tab, and it's partly succeeding because the launch costs have dropped. It gets its capsules up on Starship, on Falcon 9s very cheaply, and so that makes it profitable. And so they're making money on this. Think about what's going to happen when those stations start loading.
My understanding is that the stations will be owned and operated by the private companies that put them up.
Right.
And that NASA will essentially buy services on the stations.
That's correct.
From the private owners, which means there'll be a part of those stations that will not be under government regulations because it's not government property.
I mean, what
the ISS, which is government property.
That's cool. That's exactly right. This gets back to my Capitals and Space Policy paper from 2017. This is exactly what I recommended. NASA should build and own nothing. It should be the customer. So in these stations, what's going to happen is that the stations are owned and operated by the private companies. They therefore have the opportunity to get profit from as many places as possible, including third world nations. As long as there's not a security issue, ITAR regulations, they can put up astronauts, and they've already been doing it on those tourist missions to ISS. So at the stations themselves, NASA will rent racks as they do now. It might rent modules, like if Haven 2 is built with 8 modules in a cross, maybe NASA will pay for 2 modules, their own modules, so that they'll own them completely, operate them completely, maybe. But they're going to have to pay for it as a customer. Everything else will be private by the station, and they'll take care of it, which is why companies will be able to do things for profit to sell products on the ground, because NASA is a communist government. It doesn't allow private enterprise. It hasn't for decades. You remember when Dennis Tito wanted to go to ISS on a commercial mission flown by the Russians. It was NASA and Dan Golden who was saying, no, we can't have private enterprise in space. An American government was saying we can't have private enterprise. And a former Soviet government was saying we need to have private enterprise. It was the greatest irony in the world. Are you going to say something, Joe?
I said, Dan Golden still says stuff like that. So
yeah, unfortunately it does.
From time to time.
The difference now, though, is that NASA has accepted the capitalism model more and more as time is going, and Isaacman undeniably is following that model in
So
his
that's
announcement today.
Russia, then China, and finally the United States has decided that capitalism is a good idea. Excellent.
Well,
Bob,
it's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, so in space, Russia chose capital. Yeah, Russia, in the 60s, we were
Well, Russia was
capitalism.
out of money, so of course, they chose capitalism.
You got it. But so they chose capitalism in the 90s when they went to perestroika and they were trying to open up their society, and they had some success. Putin decided to go back to a communism model. He incorporated the entire the Russian aerospace industry into Roscosmos, and of course, they haven't accomplished anything now in a decade and a half since he did that. It's been a tragedy. And China, I wouldn't say, Joe, that China is going capitalism. China has tried to use the capitalism model within a framework of government control. And so
Well,
they have all these pseudo.
they have
What?
private rocket
Yeah,
companies,
if you read Behind the Black, you'll see I routinely call them pseudo companies.
right?
I do not call them private enterprise. They are not private. They operate like a private company. They get investment capital, usually in China. They make profits. They compete for contracts. They develop their own rockets, but they don't own anything in the end, and they can be taken away in an instant. And in fact, since the fall, I've been documenting this on Behind the Black. Since the fall, the Chinese government has moved in. In the fall, they announced they had created a new government agency to supervise all these pseudo companies. Reston, yeah, Phil, in a second. Let me finish my sentence and you can jump in. Um, uh, they created this agency, and then lo and behold, I've noticed a major slowdown in all those pseudo companies' launches and test flights. There's been a slowdown this year. Doesn't mean they won't pick up again, but they've announced subsequently that agency has imposed regulations and rules on how all the private companies should function. And so those rules and regulations have now been imposed. Those companies are pseudo because at any point the Chinese government can step in and either confiscate them or shut them down. And on top of that, there's nothing proprietary. They require every company to reveal everything to every other company. So I have already gotten the sense that, in fact, some of the newer companies that are tied in with the government itself, there's one called Cass Space, which is wholly owned by a Chinese space agency. They actually probably stole some of the technology from those pseudo companies. And so they're pseudo companies. They kind of works to get them innovation, but in the end, it's not private enterprise as we see it and as it really should be. Now, Mr. Reston, go ahead. Please jump in. What do you have to say?
Yes, I was just going to comment on your Congress in the 1970s with the space shuttle, decided that all government satellites, similar to your comment, had to be launched on the shuttle. And for GPS, the Block 1 test ones, well, they started launching in 78. So they used obsolete Atlas E's and F's, but the Block 2s were supposed to launch on the shuttle. Well, Challenger blows up. The Air Force has to develop the Delta II to launch it. And it's hard to say for sure, but it's possible that it may have delayed GPS by 2 years.
Yeah.
Just think of the opportunity cost of Congress again and its infinite wisdom monkeying, trying to justify the shuttle and forcing everyone. And the shuttle, goes up 250 miles? GPS satellites are in 12,000-mile orbits. So, talk about a stupid way to launch the Block 2s. So,
John, just to add a component to this, I forgot what I was going to say. This is what I was going to say. In my first book, Genesis, the story of Apollo 8, I talked about how our desire to beat the Soviets in the Cold War. Kennedy proposed this to prove that private enterprise and freedom could do it better. But the model he used to do that was a government Soviet-style top-down program. And that's the sad lesson that the United States and American public took from the Apollo era, that a government program, we should have a space program. And for decades, me included, we would argue, let's have how can we have a good space program? And it wasn't until I wrote Genesis in the late 90s that I realized the how horrible that concept is. I don't want a space program because that implies it's Soviet run top down. American concept is bottom up competition, individual liberty. So the lessons during Genesis, during the Apollo era, resulted in the shuttle program. We're going to have a space program that'll provide us cheap access to space. And therefore, we're going to have all launches done by the government, a space program. It's a disaster. You're absolutely right. It destroyed the entire rocket industry in the United States for decades, which is why your GPS satellites were delayed for several years for that reason. They were delayed. There's no doubt about it. You could be cautious, but I don't have to be. I can tell you it was delayed. There's no doubt about it. Because there was real struggle post Challenger trying to get things launched because you couldn't do it commercially on the shuttle anymore. And they had planned to. And a lot of things, such as the pharmaceutical research, died. They just disappeared because they couldn't get launched. And that's the tragedy. That's the tragedy of the 20th century. Americans, World War II was the big lesson here. The Americans of World War II won that war by putting together a gigantic war effort, national war effort. It was necessary, but it taught a whole generation to think in those terms for decades. And that included a space program, the war on cancer Nixon proposed. This went on, our entire mentality post-World War II led to the very giant administrative state we have today because we thought the government could do the job. And it was, government can sometimes do the job, but to rely on it solely is a very bad mistake. And in case of space, it's been a disaster. And it's only in the last decade and a half, as we've transitioned back to the capitalism model, that things are happening. And I got to tell you, the press conference today to me was really exciting because NASA is not doing it. It's asking the private sector to do it. And it's expecting the private sector to do it. And it knows that some of this is going to fail. There's no doubt about that. But it has lots of companies involved, multiple landers from Astrobotic, Intuitive Machines, Blue Origin. There's one more, and Firefly. So it's got multiple companies to work with. And that's how competition works. That's how the launch industry should be. That's why I want Blue Origin to start launching regularly so we have someone besides SpaceX doing everything. I can't wait for Neutron from Rocket Lab next year. I cannot wait for Stoke Space to start launching. They're getting close. They won't say a date, but they're getting close. So we're starting to have multiple companies in the next year, and that's going to be really exciting.
Marshall, you want to say something?
Yeah. I was wondering, has SpaceX replied in any way that you know of? I haven't seen anything today.
Replied in what way? Replied to what?
Well, they had a presentation and it's kind of like, okay, A reply, B reply, C reply, but I didn't see anything from SpaceX.
You're talking about the press conference today well, SpaceX is smart. It won't say anything. Why should it say anything? They were announcing missions, landers to the moon and rovers to the moon. SpaceX is not building any of those things. It's building a lunar lander for manned missions.
Mm-hmm.
But I suspect very strongly it's not designing its manned lunar lander with this in mind to do these missions rushed. It's going to do its manned mission. So it's not interested in this program at this moment in time. And so it has nothing to say, and it would be wise not to say anything. And that's what, and they're very, they don't have a press department. It's basically Elon Musk deciding what to say, and he knows when to talk and when not to.
They also have to be careful because they're in the period right before.
Yes, the IPO. Yeah, I should have thought of that.
Their registration statement is public, and therefore they have to be careful not to change anything that's in the registration statement, or the SEC could say you can't IPO. You have to You have to
Yeah,
re-register.
That's
I
an
should remember that.
Yeah, Joe, that's an excellent point, and it probably takes precedent. But if they didn't have the IPO, I'll bet you they'd say nothing in this situation as well. They'd be very coy because the proof to them is going to be in the pudding, their
Well,
actual
they're also going to
launch.
be the launch vehicle for a number of these missions,
You're right.
right?
Absolutely
But that's
correct.
kind of like these companies are going to have to contract with them to provide the launch, or NASA will. I don't know.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we know the Blue Origin is going to want to use its new Glenn, but we know that Intuitive Machines is going up on Falcon, and we know that others are going to go up on Falcon, and hopefully Starship down the road. Mr. Reston, you were going to say something else.
Yeah.
I'd like you to get it in.
Pete Wilhelm, who worked for the government for 55 years and, of course, was on a program last June, he made a comment to me that trying to build satellites to the specifications that NASA set forth for the shuttle was a pain in the ass. He, and so
that's par for the course. Because one of the other reasons that ISS has never been that useful as a research facility is because I've had more than a few researchers say those exact same words to me about getting their experiments on ISS. In fact, in writing Leaving Earth about space station history, mostly Soviets and Russians, I talked to one guy who did biological research, plant research, and he went. I wrote an article for Air and Space later about this. He gave up on NASA. He went to the Russians to get his plant experiment on ISS on the Russian portion of the station because he could get it done quickly. And they weren't going to weigh him down with all these requirements. This brings us back to the competitive competition between ISS and the private stations. The private stations are not going to burden companies with silly specifications. They're going to allow them to get their job done and make money. And that's one of the reasons they're signing up customers now. Starlab, doesn't have Starship. It can't launch Starlab without Starship. So it's like in limbo. So they can't even really start building it. It makes sense to them not to start building. They've got the investment capital. They've hired some people to start building the hull. But the very honesty that they're bringing in customers now tells you that there's real money to be made here. Really very big money to be made here.
I've heard a version of that ISS story, by the way, from the NanoRacks guys. Because for years, NanoRacks had a CubeSat launcher on the ISS, and it was incredible. They actually had to hire somebody who worked for NASA in order to get them through the process to get that thing onto the ISS. And then they also have the airlock, the Bishop airlock up there, which is also a NanoRacks thing. And both of those were like, it took years to get through all of you're going to put something on the precious national asset International Space Station that we control. No, you're not. Unless you follow these 422 pages of regulations.
Once again, I go back, for me, the biggest eye opener in my life was when I wrote Genesis Story of Apollo 8. Because in my histories, I write history, but when I write the space histories, my complaint of all the previous histories was they only talked about the missions and the science and the technology. But these missions are tied, the space program and space race is tied to the politics very closely. So if you don't pay attention to that, you don't tell the whole story. So I won't always want to do that. But when I wrote Genesis, I was learning things about the politics that I had not really been aware of. And one of the things I learned was how we adopted the Soviet model. And why did the Soviet Union fail? Joe, you're describing the reasons the Soviet Union failed because the bureaucratic corporate mentality of its top-down system made things difficult. People would do black market, get around it because they couldn't get things done under the corporate government model. This has nothing to do actually with Marxism or communism. It has to do with a top-down system where everything's controlled by one entity and there's no creative innovation and competition to challenge people at any point. And so ISS is a great example of that in every single way. So was the shuttle. And this is not to take anything away from NASA people who are Americans, who don't believe, who generally, at least during the shuttle era especially, did not believe in communism, but they tried very hard to help to foster a commercial bit and to a market. But that's not the way you do things. I could
The,
tell one more. Go ahead. Who's going to speak?
the interesting thing is that the Russians didn't use that model for building rocket engines. They had several different design bureaus building rocket engines, and
Right.
they aggressively competed with each other
Absolutely right.
to get
Absolutely
onto
correct.
flights, which is why there's so many Russian rocket engines, like
This is
100
correct.
of them or something.
I
This,
always had a theory about why the Soviet system failed was the fact that nobody would retire. If they weren't
well,
pushed out, they just die on the job. And the result is, after Stalin's purges, they had a young group of people who were pretty aggressive. In that period, their economy grew pretty well. But then when they aged into the job, they just quit. They just stayed there until they died, or somebody kicked them out.
John, that's not incorrect, but you got to get to more fundamental principles. In a top-down system, authoritarian system, dry rot sets in. It's the line I used to use. So you get a new bunch of people in, they're in charge, they are top down, no one can fire them, there's no competition, so there's nothing challenging them. And so after a while, dry rot sets in any organization. In a competitive situation where new companies are competing for market share, you're always challenged. So those older companies either die, which is happening in the US in the aerospace industry, or they revise themselves and survive. And the Soviet government didn't compete and died. The Putin Roscosmos right now is struggling to come back to life. They're competing now with the rest of the world because they're not going to have a free ride on ISS anymore. So that you might see some results from them because they got to show results. They haven't had to show results now for decades, so they didn't do anything. They might have to now. Competition will bring them back to life. Um, um, I know. I think someone put up on the chat thread that some of the NASA astronauts, including the ones on Apollo 8, were against going away from the '60s model. Yes, but they were all government people, government-minded people, all thinking that way. I mean, I talked to Frank Borman and Jim Lovell at length about this subject. And they absolutely had no faith in private enterprise to do this. They thought it would never happen. They thought there was no profit to be made in space. It would never happen. That's what they believed. But they came once again out of that World War II mentality that looked at this kind of thing that had no profit and couldn't see any way to make profit. And so it had to be done by the government. They feared that if the government stepped out, nothing would happen. And SpaceX and Elon Musk and others have proven that wrong, and that's a good thing. So commercial satellite business has proven that wrong as well. It's not just SpaceX. So yes, Apollo astronauts. I can't have more respect for them, but they're not always right. Space. All right. So there's another Joe. Space as science. The science. We must follow the science. Well, one of my complaints about NASA's program on Mars for decades, I talk about this on my numerous cool images that I post from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The landers on to Mars have all, except for one, landed in the equatorial regions for geological reasons. One lander tried to land near the poles. That was the Phoenix lander. It failed, unfortunately. But that was also for science reasons. All these landers have landed for science reasons. Now, I'm not saying science is bad here. Science is good. We need to learn about Mars, scout it out if we're going to go there, without question. But the focus on science has prevented exploration of Mars up to this point from a colonist's engineering perspective. And today's press conference about the moon illustrates a major shift when it comes to the moon, because NASA's program up until recently was focused entirely on, quote, science. The Viper lander was originally lunar resource. That was originally the resource lander. Then it became Viper. And it was going to be doing science on the moon. We're going to find out about the water. We're going to find out about what's there. But it was science on the moon. Billions of dollars were spent on that, more than $1 billion. Maybe it's going to be $2 billion before it launches. But that was the focus. Today's press conference was not focused on science. There will be science done. NASA will definitely be doing science on the moon, but it's now focusing much less on science and much more on the knowledge you need to build a lunar base. Some of that's science-based, but most of it is engineering-based. And that's a major shift. So, the planetary community for decades was hostile to manned space because it said you could do it cheaper with an unmanned mission. But Hubble proved to them, the astronomy community, that a manned component to their astronomy program was beneficial, because once Hubble was launched and was maintained by human beings, it brought so much interest to the astronomy community. They were able to get funding for a whole slew of big space telescopes throughout the 90s and aughts. And it revolutionized the astronomy industry much better than anything they had done previously. And I will tell you that after that happened, the astronomy community's attitude, astronomy specifically, astronomy community's attitude towards manned space changed radically. They were no longer the scientists saying manned space is a waste of money, we can do it cheaper unmanned. They didn't say that anymore. They knew that as a component, they would benefit from manned space enormously. And so, the science should follow what we need in space, I think. Go ahead, Marshall.
Well, I was just thinking that, yes, over and over, the sales pitch was, we're doing it for the science. Over and over.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this pitch works for Congress.
Well, Congress, you're right, but that's because Congress is a bunch of ignorant fools, if I should be polite here and say what I think. They don't know anything, and so you got to sell them the idea. So I'll use perseverance as a wonderful example because it drives me up a wall. Every press release from the Perseverance team, every single time out of NASA, we're searching for life with Perseverance. It's an outright lie. It's an outright lie. Perseverance is there on the moon, on Mars, to do what Curiosity is doing and what the orbiters are doing, to learn about the geology and the science history of that planet. If they should find microbiotic life, not likely, that would be a surprise and it would be wonderful. But they say they're doing it to find life, but that's a lie. That's not what they're doing. But the reason they say it, and this is what you said, Marshall, is to sell it to the public and to the Congress. And they think most of the public is ignorant or not paying close attention. So this is a nice crystal little shiny object they can throw to the public to sell them on. And the fact is that the truth of the matter is, as demonstrated today's press conference, is the public's really not interested in those shiny objects, really. They get excited by the idea of really doing something, of going into space and exploring. Look, as you all know, I had lots of reservations about Artemis 2. I still think it was generally a big PR thing and didn't really accomplish very much. I won't deny that, but I have I will not deny the fact that the very act of sending astronauts beyond Earth orbit for the first time they didn't really go beyond Earth orbit, by the way, but let's say they did because they went beyond the moon, excited the public in ways that you didn't get any excitement by saying we're searching for life on Mars with Perseverance, because it's not true. And this is more true. This is human beings doing it. Anyway, and Joe pointed out in the chat that NASA hasn't sent a life experience to Mars in decades, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with you there, Joe. Both on the lab experiments on Curiosity, the ability to actually do some lab tests are comparable in many ways to what they put on Viking. And so they could conceivably detect some things along the same lines, maybe not as precisely aligned to life, because that's a mistake. You don't know enough, so you shouldn't be narrowing your research too tightly. The Viking missions were a mistake. They narrowed their research too tightly, so you're not going to get a good answer because you don't know enough about Mars to really look right. Well, they're trying to find out more about Mars to look right, but the Curiosity Lab core experiences, when they dig up some drill samples, they can do some experiments that are somewhat comparable to Viking. And so if they found life, they could find some data. Perseverance, they found, and they have said, by the way, Curiosity, they found some evidence they think has life type signals. I've been very skeptical about those statements because they tend to be the PR here that I've just pointed out. But they have found some evidence. It's interesting. Interesting is the best way to put it. It's not conclusive by any means. But they're not going to search for life. They're going to find out about Mars. And we're moving into the next stage where we're going to stop trying to find about Mars. We're going to start to try to find out how we can go there. And that's going to be really exciting. And we're doing the first stage on the moon.
Bob, what is the latest with what ULA is doing or where it's headed?
Well, let's see. What do I know about ULA? My brain has been someplace else for the last hour and a half, so I have to think about this for a minute. Well, they have, right, Vulcan. Vulcan is grounded right now, right? Vulcan is grounded because the solid rocket boosters, the strap-ons that they use, are built by Northrop Grumman. And they've had I think, how many Vulcan missions? Someone could tell me better. I'm doing this from memory, but I think there have been 4 Vulcan missions, and 2 of them, the nozzles on the strap-on boosters. Two of the missions had failures, but I don't think there's 4 total. And so the military is grounded Vulcan. It will not launch any military satellites on Vulcan until they get this nozzle problem fixed. Now, ULA doesn't build the strap-on boosters. Northrop Grumman does. So Northrop Grumman's got to get the problem fixed. I did report on Behind the Black a few weeks ago, or maybe last week, that Northrop Grumman's done some static fire tests with their GEM strap-on boosters that were successful, which implied, there was not a lot of information, which implied that they've been testing a solution to the nozzle problem and they've had success. We haven't had anything more about that. There has been some talk that they might launch Vulcan with no solid rocket boosters to launch some Amazon LEO satellites. ULA's got a big contract to launch LEO, and Amazon's got a problem because it's supposed to have 1,600 satellites up by July. It's only got about 250 up right now, approximately. It's got to get. It's not going to get 1,600 up by July, so it's not going to meet its FCC requirements. But it wants to show good faith so they can maybe the FCC will let them have a waiver. And so that's the question. All right. So Joe, you always why don't you just say it? Come on in and just tell us what you just posted on chats instead of me.
Yeah, I believe the NG4 mission, the next New Glenn, is a LEO launch. I think they're launching 26 satellites or something like that.
Well, so the question would be whether they're going to use any strap-on boosters or not. And I don't know.
No. This is New Glenn, not.
I'm sorry. That's New Glenn.
Not Vulcan.
Vulcan. So Vulcan wanted to do like a dozen launches plus 20 plus launches over. ULA wanted to do 20 launches this year. Half Vulcan and half Atlas. They're doing their Atlas launches because they have the rocket.
They'll have to reduce the number of LEO satellites on the rocket if they don't have the
boosters.
The boosters, because all of those satellite constellation launches are weight limited, right? Because those LEO satellites are heavy. They're about as heavy as the Starlink 3 satellites are going to be.
Right. Amazon didn't think small to begin with or fast. But either way, the question is whether they can put any satellites of sufficient number on a Vulcan rocket without boosters to make the launch worthwhile. And I am betting, there's been no statement, but I'm betting there's been negotiations going on and they're trying to determine whether it's worth it. So in terms of ULA, they're kind of dead in the water until they get this strap-on solved, and it's killing them because right now the military has shifted 3 launches to SpaceX in the last few months that were going to go on a ULA launch. Now, in every time they did this, the military said, we're not taking a launch away from ULA. We're swapping a later SpaceX launch for a more a closer launch that we got to get up, and we'll get SpaceX do the recent launch, and we'll give ULA the later launch. Well, at some point, the military is not going to do that anymore. They're going to just give them to SpaceX. And so ULA's hurting right now. Plus, they're not getting any revenue. They're not getting launches up. So that's where they stand right now. This is partly the problem that when you don't vertically integrate, they don't make their rocket totally themselves, like SpaceX and Rocket Lab does, and Stoke Space is doing, and Relativity is doing, and Firefox does. They do it partially, and so they're kind of at the mercy of another company. Now, of course, that company wants to make money. Northrop Grumman, they've got to sell the strap-on boosters, so they got to fix it. But you're kind of at their mercy while you wait.
Um, I was just thinking that once SpaceX goes into, well, after the double catch, it's going to be hard for ULA to sell any more launches.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Even if they do the double catch, that will not be an operational Starship Super Heavy.
True.
They have a lot of missions they got to do, and they have a priority. And SpaceX does more than one thing at once, but their priorities are, I think, right now launching Starlink satellites first. And so if they're going to do any commercial launches with Starship, it's going to be Starlink satellites. That's going to be their first priority. They will do commercial flights, obviously. The NASA commercial human land, Artemis 3 orbital mission, they're going to try to do a demo. They have to do a demo mission landing on the moon to demonstrate lander for NASA. So their focus is going to be on that. Their focus is going to be on refueling. And Phil, as you point out, this is a question mark they've got to prove, and I'm waiting too. I want to see them prove it. So they have those priorities. As for ULA and its Vulcan and Ariana Space and the Ariana 6 rocket, and New Glenn. But let's put New Glenn aside for the minute. Just talk Ariana 6 and Vulcan because they're not reusable at all. Those two rockets have major contracts that are keeping them alive at the moment. The question really is, in 2 or 3 years, will they be able to get any contracts? We're talking about 3 to 4, maybe 3 years from now. They're really going to be facing some problems. Now, Ariana 6 has got a very big contract with both Amazon LEO and with some European Space Agency satellite projects. So they've got a backlog, a manifest that'll keep them going. But it's draining capital from the European Space Agency because it's more expensive, and it's draining capital from Amazon because it's more expensive. At a certain point, it's going to become necessary to abandon those expensive rockets. And so, in the long term, you're absolutely right, Marshall. But I wouldn't say that's the next catch. I'd say it's at least 2-3 years, at least 2-3 years in the future.
I was thinking about maybe 50 to 100 commercial flights. And then you're going to have a real competition for the next, and about 100 commercial Starship flights. They'll have the Starships turned over fast, and the capacity and the price will be so low that it will shut down the other ones. Now, how long does it take to get to 100 commercial flights? Maybe 2 years. So,
I said 2 to 3 years. I said 2 to 3 years, but I think even that's a little optimistic. I think we're still looking to more. 2 to 3 years is an Elon Musk schedule, but it is still not unreasonable because I really do anticipate that they're going to start launching Starships on an almost monthly basis for the rest of this year. Now, if they don't do that, that's a problem. And Phil, you got a point there if that's a problem. But I think that's going to be what's going to happen. They've been prepping for that. And I think their first mission will maybe be 6 weeks to 2 months away, but the next one will be more like 5 weeks away. And then we might see monthly and maybe even 3 to 4 weeks, 3 weeks difference because they got to get flights off. And
I think we're going to wait until they have at least a second tower before we start launching with a high cadence.
I agreed. I'm not talking about
Right,
a high. I'm talking about
right now the
weeks.
tower is very delicate, and they cannot destroy the one tower they have that works.
All right. So give me an idea, Joe. What do you think then? The best cadence they can do with this one tower right now. What do you think?
I
You're
think
the
they'll
better
do.
engineer.
I think they'll do either 3 or 4 more flights this year.
3 to 4. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we have 7 months left essentially. So I'm saying I was hopefully maybe figuring 5 or 6 flights because I didn't expect them to go
Mhm.
as fast right away. You're saying a more 3 to 4, and that's
Yeah, because
reasonable. That's reasonable.
the problem is their second tower will become available for catches sometime in like Q4 maybe. And that'll let them do a catch of both a booster and a ship,
Okay.
right? Because the problem they have right now is if they catch a booster, they have 24 hours to get it off the tower because the ship has to stay in orbit for 24 hours to come back to launch site
Right.
because they don't have enough cross range to do RTLS
Right.
from orbit. So they have 24 hours to get that puppy off the tower and get the tower ready to catch again, which I think they'll be able to do by the end of this year. But if they break that one tower, they're like out of action, and
Yeah, I think that
they're building all kinds of towers everywhere else, but none
right.
of those are going to be finished before the end of this year.
Yeah, I think though common sense says they are not going to try to do a double catch on a single tower. They're just not going to do it. It's not they have enough to do in orbit, testing in orbit and launching and bringing things down that they can throw starships away for at least 6 months to a year until they're ready to do it right. So I don't think they're going to rush to
Mhm.
catch the second ship anyway. I don't think so. I've always thought the catching of the second ship is next year. I've always thought that. And I wasn't thinking in terms of towers. I was just thinking in terms of what their priorities should be. Your point is well taken. Um,
But you got to keep in mind, like the catching the ship is a very important part of reusability. So
right.
Yeah.
they need to take mass out of the ship and at the same time not weaken it in a key location too much that they can't catch it. So
Yeah.
they got to keep catching while they keep taking mass out of the ship and
Right.
improving its performance.
This is absolutely true, but once again, it's how you set your priorities in a developmental program. And I think right now their priorities are focused more on getting Starship operational in orbit, able to get into orbit, get fuel into orbit, do docking in orbit, fueling in orbit, as you say, to do those kind of things first. To demonstrate the thermal system works is, of course, part of this, but you don't have to actually
Mhm.
land it or catch it. They're demonstrating that by doing soft splashdowns each time, and they're getting to a point. I think that their goal, and we don't know with those Devil Dog Starlink camera satellites. We don't know how much maneuverability and visuals they got. Did they follow Starship down into the atmosphere? Were they shooting shots of that thermal system all the way down? If they weren't, I guarantee you that is the plan down the road to get as much information about the thermal system as possible long before they actually catch it on a tower. So that reusability is moving. I would say they're remarkably close to getting a thermal shuttle type reusable spacecraft right now, based upon this most recent flight and what the system looked. I mean, I know Doug Platter on Sunday pointed out that they had some leakage, and I went back and looked, and yes, it looks like something's leaking out. But from a point of view of the spacecraft, it didn't destroy the spacecraft. It landed whole. So
Yeah,
whatever
there were
leakage there
no
was, it
hinge
didn't destroy it.
there were
What?
there were no flap hinge issues on this flight. It looks like there was no penetrations. There were no tiles that came off that
There
we could
appeared to be,
Mhm.
this is the, Joe, you missed this. Doug Platter pointed this out. And if you go back and look at the last 5 minutes as it's coming down through the atmosphere, there is something small, some kind of plume coming out of the hull of the ship. And I'm assuming that's the thermal side of the ship. Now, I could be wrong there, but there seems to be some kind of plume coming out, which suggested some penetration. But once again, it didn't destroy the ship. So whatever it was not total, was not critical. It's an issue that has to be raised. But overall, I think they are very strongly close to having a comparable
I
space
I
shuttle
think they
vehicle.
really want to recover a ship. So I would not be surprised to see them recover a ship on the tower within the next 3 flights. And the reason because they really want to
Mhm.
recover one of those heat shield. They want to recover the heat shield to be able to examine it in detail. Um,
Well,
Yeah, that's really
I
important.
hope.
Like if they don't start dissecting one of the ships to figure out all the weak spots, any place that got too hot, where the metal got
Right.
weakened by the heat, like that's really important for them. They got to
Right.
figure out
I think
to make the ship usable.
they'll probably scratch a booster into the ocean so they don't have to do a double catch on the same tower. And they'll just have that for that mission,
Hmm.
the ship will come back, but the booster will not.
Well, I'll tell you right now that I hope I am 100% wrong and you're 100% right. And your
Mm.
point is very well taken. Because there's no question, one of the advantages SpaceX has had over everybody else is it has had first stages recovered that it could look at and analyze and figure out how to make them work better.
Hmm.
And nobody else has had that capability. And uh, uh, Electron, I mean, not Rocket Lab tried to do that on the first stage. They said very openly, we've given up because we think neutron's a better place to spend our money. But they also said that what we learned in doing that and recovering those first stages was priceless in learning how to build neutron
Hmm.
better. And so this is the same thing. So yeah, I think your point's well taken, and I hope I'm wrong. I also know that Elon Musk time tends to be more ambitious than it can be, though it's never unrealistic. It's maybe too optimistic, but it's never unrealistic. And so even we could both be right, and it'll be the first of the year when they do it.
I waited 989 days for one of his cars at one point. So not that I was counting, but that was my Model 3.
Hmm.
So I know all about Elon Musk's schedules.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
may I ask a fun management question? Uh, do you think Elon Musk purposely makes short predictions to push the staff, really push the staff to keep going and so on? I mean, I've experienced that back in my Texas Instruments day. We got to get this chip done. We got to get this done. And the tests fail. And it's like, oh my, and, they got it out. They
Marshall,
made lots of money. But they're always pushing. And it may be a management strategy that
no.
Elon just lives with.
I think that there's two components to this. Elon Musk sets tough schedules. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I emphasize the word realistic again. He is not demanding unrealistic schedules from his company, his engineers. So they know he's giving them an honest appraisal of how long it can take. In other words, it could be done that fast.
Mm-hmm.
And they realize that's an honest appraisal on his part. They also know that it's a difficult schedule to meet, that it's a schedule based upon everything going right. And they also know they're going to try to get everything right because they want to do it just like he does. But he's not giving them a lie. He's giving them a
Mm-hmm.
realistic number so they can trust that. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly so that's the difference. It's not a fake schedule that you see from uh, Donald Trump in his first term. We're going to land men on the moon by 2028. And I said, this is a fake number. And it's still a fake number as far as I'm concerned. Or actually, he said at the time 24. Uh,
24.
and it's a fake number.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean anything. But Musk's numbers mean something. They're based on reality. So that's the big difference. But there's no question he pushes it. He doesn't give them leisure time like Amazon did with its LEO satellites. He
Mm-hmm.
fired the people that were making the original Starlink satellites because they were setting leisurely goals. He said, we can't work that way. He fired them. They went over to LEO. They built LEO, took them a decade longer to get it launched. Meanwhile, his new management team got Starlink up and running and operational within 2 years, and they own the market share. Leo's going to have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of trouble getting that market share now because 10 million people, half of whom could have bought Leo, are not going to switch at this moment in time.
Uh,
And I've seen the prices, and they're pretty darn good. They're starting to compete with, landlines and so on like that.
Me personally, we abandoned our landline about 2 months ago and have gone to Starlink, which is what I'm using right now. And We'll be using Starlink for that and cell phones for our phones because it made sense to switch.
Mhm.
The service is much better. I should point out, I'm having the outside of my house painted. So yesterday, the painters working on the roof, they had to cover to protect the Starlink antenna. So they put like paper across it. Uh, you know,
Oh,
I noticed a slight slowdown in my internet capability and didn't realize what was causing. And when I say slight, I mean really slight, but it was noticeable, but nothing significant. It was almost like working with CenturyLink again. I only realized that they had covered it when I talked to them at the end of the day. But once again, it works, and there are 10 million people, and the numbers will keep growing. Leo, we need competition. I want other companies to do
mhm.
it, but they're going to have a hard time breaking into the market share now.
Bob, I want to probably take you where you and no one else wants to go, but what the heck? First of all, I have tried to switch to Starlink and to a microwave system to get away from Cox. And I have a homeowners association, and they won't allow antennas on the roof of the houses in their HOA. And since I am a renter, the landlord kisses the rear end of the HOA. But I've walked through the whole area with my dog, and nobody's got roof antennas. OTARG, which is a federal law, doesn't really apply. So, and there isn't any way to circumvent around that. So I am stuck with Cox cable
Uh,
because I'm not going to get fiber in here in my lifetime.
right.
And I cannot put microwave antennas up, and I cannot put Starlink up
I
unless
should point, I don't know if, David, I don't know if you have a flat roof. I have a flat roof, and it ended up where we put the Starlink antenna was in the center of the flat roof. There was a parapet in the
no,
center where we
no,
could put
I
it.
don't. And I have second story and I have tile, but the HOA won't let antennas on the roof or on the side
Let let me
patio,
let, let
or
me finish my
and you just can't fight it.
if you don't have a flat roof, that's a problem. The reason I say it because my antenna is totally invisible. No one would know it's there. And so if you had a roof where you could put it up invisible, I would consider doing it. Now, there's another component here, and this is about antennas. My wife is very involved with ham radio for years, and so I've gotten involved.
Hmm.
Hams are expert in doing antennas and HOAs that no one notices are
They
there.
have different rules, and,
It's true.
and OTARG says that you can put antennas up in common areas, but the common areas where I live don't have reception to microwave or to even Starlink. And they're still visible from the street. So if you are visible from the street, even in a common area, you can't do that. And you can try to sue the HOA, and a lot of people have done that, and there are attorneys that make a great living representing homeowners to sue HOAs on 10,000 different issues. And it's not a good track record for the homeowners.
Well,
So I just
there's
threw
two.
that out there, but that's not what I wanted to ask you about. But
Let me just, before you ask the question, let me just say two things. One, this sounds like something that SpaceX should get involved in
they
legally.
should.
Just get the law changed.
They should because they have the money to fight the HOAs. The microwave services don't have the money to fight the HOAs. But yeah, SpaceX could absolutely
Should.
find a way to do that. Or if they could make the case that their antennas are discrete installations, and then they go to fight for the homeowner, but that system is not in place. So,
So what was your question? This real quick space.
so my real question is, we've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes about this glorious future we're going to have in space because of all the commercial markets and everything. I want a fair assessment so you can try to be objective. But when I look out at the horizon, and probably I'm jaded because of my age and everything else, I see so much uncertainty because of political winds and directions and incompetence and bias and all sorts of stuff that I don't ever remember seeing before. How politically fragile is the future we've been talking about for the past hour and a half. A fair assessment, not because you want to talk about
No,
cap.
let me do it. Let me
Yeah,
do it. I mean, and this is actually the right question to ask me because what do? I'm a historian. I write histories, and all my histories they always end up to be about the overall cultural social change over a period of time.
right.
That's what I found with Genesis, but I really found it about when I wrote Leaving Earth. The first sentence in Leaving Earth is societies change. That's the first sentence in that book. And Conscious Choice, my most recent book, is very specifically about how the Virginia colony in the founding of our nation in the 1600s changed as a culture from a freedom loving, hostile to slavery culture to one that was a slave state. And how did the culture change? That's what I write about. So you're asking a question now about our present situation and what is the future. And there are two ways to look at it. And I look at both ways schizophrenically on a daily basis, even every 5 minutes. I'll use H.G. Wells as my analogy. H.G. Wells died in 1939. H.G. Wells was one of the great literary giants of the 19th, 20th century, and he wrote about the future. He was one of the very first science fiction writers, but science fiction didn't exist. He was using it as a way to try to see what the future could be like and to ask questions, just to ask questions, literary questions that were interesting. He was a great writer. And he was a hopeful man. He looked for the future and he was trying to figure out what's the best way to do things. And what he wrote about, Time Machine is a great book in this respect.
Right.
He started out as a socialist and abandoned that idea later on in his life. H.G. Wells died in 1939. When he died, he saw the world from that moment in time, 39. Nazis dominated Europe. Fascism was everywhere. Same thing in Japan was invading China. The world looked like a horrible place at that moment. It was a very horrible place. And so when he died, his view of the world was extremely pessimistic. Didn't know where it would go. And from this moment in time, looking at the problems that you've just outlined and I'm very aware of, I get very depressed because I never imagined in my lifetime that I would be in a place where a Jewish rabbi in New York City or is it Chicago, one of those two places, his family is getting harassed and attacked simply because they're Jewish. I never felt that would ever happen in the United States. And you have a whole range of people now in the United States who are willing to commit murder because they disagree with people. And that's a sad thing. And that's kind of like what Orwell was seeing in 39 when he died. So that's the pessimistic view. But the optimistic view would be to see what happened 6 years later after the victory of World War II. And we had more than a half a century of world peace, really. Even though Cold War existed, it was a relatively peaceful Cold War. Both the Soviet Union and the United States did not want nuclear war, and were trying to find a way to coexist aggressively in a competitive situation. They were really trying to do that for 50 years. No one wanted to do another war. And we stood by the beliefs that our country was founded on for those 50 years. And so I look at the situation now, and when I'm in my dark mood, I say, I can't see how this is going to get straightened out because we have so many kids that don't read, they're not educated, they don't know what the past is like. They're buying this bad propaganda that is just a lie about our country and about others. But then I think about it a little and I says, we're resilient, we're competitive. That makes us resilient. That forces a change and correction. And so that's the hopeful sign there. And space, this goes back to the Soviet Union, what I learned when doing Leaving Earth. Space tends to lead the way in the positive direction. When space is given its freedom, the space industry, they not only do great things, but they lead the culture in a new direction in a positive way. And it did this in the Soviet Union. Russia moved into a capitalist model for most of the 90s and early aughts, based on what it learned in the 90s with its competitive Gorbachev space program, trying to do capitalism. It tried to learn how to do capitalism based on what space did. And space right now is doing that in the United States, hands down more than the Russian Soviets ever did. And so that is a hopeful sign. So I'm giving you the two sides of the coin, the yin yang of what I see right now as a historian. One of the things we also have to remember is that the people exist. We got bad people who exist, and we got good people who exist. They both exist. The question is who's going to win the war, the battle. And I think right now, in the long run, I favor the good people because they do better work.
Could you put a probability number on that? Like if we were going to the prediction markets, what would you say? And then I want to say one more thing.
Based on what I just said, I would say 50-50, but I would give it, Joseph, don't do it. I would say the optimist in me, because that's who I am, I would generally say favor the good side. But the world is a yin yang, and the yin yang is 50-50. So
No.
it's for evil to triumph, good men need only do nothing. So I'm giving this is the political part of the show, David. We haven't done that much, and I've stopped doing it on Behind the Black because I'm just don't know what to say anymore. I've said it multiple times.
There's Boulder City is, just about 20 miles away. That's where Lake Mead is in Boulder Dam. And their city council just voted unanimously to turn down data centers in Boulder City. So I read the comments from the people, and I cannot believe how stupid people are. I mean, really stupid. It's like it'll cause dirty rainwater in our yard. That's stupid. Okay.
Don't get me started on the
Wait a
data.
minute, I'm not finished. So they and others have organized in Nevada, and this is probably elsewhere too, change.org petitions, and they're working really hard with funding for Nevada to submit change.org petitions to bar data centers any place in Nevada. And I read the comments on that, and again, I'm wondering, how are they even coming up with these?
All right, Joe, before you get
That goes
started.
in with my space question too. There is a lot of darkness out there.
Oh,
I'm
yes. All right.
wondering how fragile
I do not
space
think
future
this is organic.
All right, Joe, wait, let me, you're right, but since I'm the
ahead.
guest, let me, I'm going to say what or you said it, and I was going to go there as well. For one thing, X has demonstrated that a lot of the stupidity we see in comments and on X is manufactured. It's foreign sometimes, it's financed, and it has nothing to do with reality. That's one. So we have to discount a lot of those comments and X comments that we see.
But
Don't
we
take them too
discount
serious. Wait, don't take them too
masses
seriously.
don't.
All right, wait. But that's one. Two, you have to also remember that a lot of it is ignorance and people saying ignorant things. And that's the way of life. That's going to be the case. There's a third point, which is that there are valid reasons to question data centers in a lot of places. There are valid reasons. It is why the big tech companies that want those data centers for profit are going into space because they are having trouble getting them on the ground because there are issues. So those factors are all there. There are stupid, when I was a kid, I used to read the Daily News in New York City, and the Daily News would have a letter section. And I used to read it as a kid, getting entertained by the stupid comments that they published in the letter section. There's no difference today. But when I read those, when I was a kid, I was at 10, 15. I also recognized they're stupid. They're not but that's entertaining. And so we have to keep that in mind as well. The dark side you raise is a problem only if we don't recognize it's there. If we continue to consider it a joke or unimportant, it will overwhelm us. There's no doubt about that. But I think the society will, because of the competitive nature of our society and the need to succeed in life, I think our society is going to correct itself and not let those people do it. And I think and this is not an endorsement political. People will misunderstand me, but it's not. I think the reason Donald Trump was elected twice was our public trying to make some correction to its direction. I honestly think that. It doesn't matter if the direction was even right. I'm not arguing for him. I'm saying it's the society trying to make a correction. And Personally, based on experience and having watched him work, I think it was right, but that's not my point. My point is a society has that flexibility being bottom up to make correction. And so that's where the hope comes from. But if we don't pay attention, then we will fail. And that's the bottom line. And that's where we stand, David.
Joe, were you going to say something?
Yeah, on the data center thing, I must admit we have this issue in my town here in California.
I can
There's a well, actually, I'm in the mountains, right? So I'm like, 100 miles from the bay, right? But some cloud hosting company has decided they want to build a data center here directly adjacent to a biomass power plant that's out of action, right? It's been shut down for about 15 years. And so they want to bring the power plant back into action. It'll generate 41 megawatts, and then they'll put a data center on the land next to the plant, right? And every time I go on Nextdoor, there are literally 20-1 comments against it. And our city council or our town council, I think, had a meeting about 3 days ago. I didn't get to go, but there's video of it. And apparently, like, it was 100-1 against having a data center. And there are all these people like, no, we don't want any AI here. And we don't want a data center. We don't want our water to be gone. And and there are people spreading this stuff.
Well, Boulder City, that sounds on Nextdoor. That's where I get the comments. Yeah.
Right. There are people spreading this stuff. And my guess is the Chinese are behind it. Right.
I would say that there's a component of that. I agree with you there, Joe, but I would say we should not dismiss the sad partisan nature of society. The Elon Musk hate of the last 2 years simply because he decided to support Donald Trump. This is America. You have the right to pick who you want to vote for. And you can say so publicly, free speech. To hate someone so blindly for that, to actually go around sabotaging Tesla cars as if that's attacking Elon Musk, to firebomb a Tesla factory, it's an insanity that
actually Las Vegas was the place the firebombing incident.
Firebombed the thing, yeah. I was in
Yeah, well, the point I'm making, though, is that there are people, unfortunately, this is not Chinese, there are people that unfortunately are now so emotionally overwhelmed that they're willing to do those kind of things. Look, this gets back to what I said about the difference between the calmness of the '60s space program, big space, and today with them yelling. We do put too much value on emotion today. Oh, you got to follow what you feel. And past generations that I grew up in, that I'm remembering, and historically I've read at great length about history, did not think that way. And in fact, one of the sayings that I learned a few years ago, we do this all the time. We ask people, how do you feel about something? What do you feel? Well, you know what I feel? And I don't do that anymore. A radio host pointed this out on a talk show once. Don't do that. Say, what do you think? What do you think about that? Well, because if you use the word think, it automatically forces you to look at it in a different way because words mean things. So when you say, how do you feel? You're thinking it in a nebulous emotional manner. If you say, how do you think about something? You become more thoughtful. And what we have today is too many people. How do they feel? They're only thinking in terms of how they feel, and they're not thinking rationally or thoughtfully at length. And that applies to the data centers because, as I say, very rationally and thoughtfully, there are questions about data centers that need to be asked when you install them in a local community. There are rational reasons that they should be raised, but you shouldn't go, as you see, Joe and David, nuts on Nextdoor making all kinds of claims and you don't know diddly squat. You should really think about it and talk about it rationally. There are real reasons to question it, but we don't. There's too much emotion nowadays, and that's the real problem. And that's, once again, the rational, civilized people, because civilization is being civil and rational and thoughtful. We have to push our society back in that direction. Look, one of the reasons I'm behind the black, I forbid obscenity, because when you use an obscenity, it replaces thought. And by demanding people not use obscenities, they find they have to think about what they want to say instead of blasting out a bad word. And you know what happened to the conversation on Behind the Black when I did that? It rose remarkably, became much more intelligent and interesting and very educational for me. It was very good. I have really wonderful commenters, and some of those commenters are people that were not so interesting in the beginning when they tried to be obnoxious. When I said you got to be civilized human being and civil, they became much more intelligent.
Let's see what Marshall wants to say.
Sure,
Yeah,
go ahead, Marshall.
I was going to ask, how often do you find an emotional circuit in a computer system or in a CAD system or any kind of mechanical system? There's no emotional.
All
You,
right.
you
Now
can't
having,
know
all right,
if this
Marshall,
will
I
work
must
or
make a
not.
point. I know that, but I must make a point. In saying we must be rational and thoughtful, I do not want to make you think that I don't think emotion is important because it's the emotion in humans, the passion is where the creativity comes from, which computers don't have. AI does not have. No matter how good AI gets, it does not have the creative emotion and creativity that humans have, that life has. And so you do have to be emotional at a certain point, but you have to know how to use that emotion intelligently to achieve things. This is a very subtle thing. It is what civilization is built on. If you read the great masters, if you read Plato, right through to even the 20th century, including me, you'll get a real sense of what one must do to find that fine line between emotion and rationality. And that's what civilization is all about. And that's what we, the intelligent ones, whoever we are, and maybe I'm not one, but I'm going to try. This is what we have to do to turn the corner in the right way.
That answer was posted on Nextdoor yesterday, so you can go check it out.
Thank you, because I think you're absolutely right.
AJ, you want to say something? And John,
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that lady Erin Brekovich. I guess I'm not sure if it's Brekonovich or Brekovich, but she has started a blog or a website called against data centers, of course, brokovichdatacenter.com. And so, I mean, and I think she's getting a lot of, interest in that. But I think that it's true that there's things happening or things from China and other places where all those things are, happening. But there's a lot of people here in this country itself on the, a certain side of the coin where there is a lot of opposition to this. Along those lines, I want to ask a question about why is it that data centers require a lot of water? As I think Joe has sort of mentioned implicitly. So,
Joe, you give me.
Okay, so originally, up till 4 or 5 years ago, most data centers were cooled by evaporative cooling. They'd have big cooling towers, usually on the roof or somewhere, there where they were literally cascading water over fan coils, and there'd be a giant fan blowing through it, and the water would evaporate, right? That system isn't used as much now in modern designs as it was there. But data centers got a bad reputation for like consuming a ton of water. Like I used to work on siting data centers at Google, and we built 2 gigawatts of data centers, and no one noticed. Right. Like there wasn't any organized community opposition to them and all that kind of stuff. The problem we're having now is that the data center build is so off the charts,
yeah,
right? Like people want to build like 80 gigawatts of data centers in like the next year or something.
yeah,
Clue, the grid only puts about 40 gigawatts of new power on the grid every year in the United States. And that's an increase from what it was a couple of years ago. So a lot of those data centers aren't going to get built. That's pretty clear, right? But the problem is the scale up is just so incredible.
Can
What's
I
going on here?
yeah.
can I bring wait can wait
yeah.
I want to wait a minute. I want to bring this back to space. I will tell you right now that everything Joe just said and the opposition, AJ, that you raised and David raised is actually the best thing possible for the space industry. because one of the reasons the data centers are trying to move to space is for all the reasons you're both bringing up and all the opposition. And so they want to put them in orbit. And once again, I'm not arguing that data centers are good or bad or can accomplish anything. I'm just looking at it from a space perspective. You get a rocket industry that's got to launch a lot of stuff. You got a rocket industry that's going to get cheaper and easier, which means other businesses will come along, even if the data centers all fail. So in the long run, this is the best thing. The opposition is really not a bad thing. It's a good thing for the space industry. So that's. I just want to insert that because this is about space right now. I want to be clear on that.
John Hunt.
And actually, one of the other reasons why data centers may require a lot of water is because some of the power was supposed to come from, or is planned to come from pressurized water reactors and other nuclear power entities. There, you will require a fair amount of water to cool, cool the water that is heated, and so that's probably one of the reasons why there is a demand. There might be a demand for water. However, if you were to go with advanced reactor like molten salt reactor or something like that, you would not require that. So I think if we can, educate people about that, then there would be less of an opposition because of the, like what they say, oh, the water is a problem. You're going to take away all our water.
But Joe just pointed out it's not just the water. The power requirements are so gigantic.
No, but the power requirement will also come from the nuclear power, the molten salt reactor type of a nuclear power.
Okay, that's a good point.
And also it doesn't require water, so it solves both problems actually.
I personally would like the problems not to get solved and that you have to launch lots of data centers. That's my personal road.
I
50 rocket companies.
3 or 4 years from now, that's where all the tokens are going to be going, is to the orbital data centers.
I think so too.
But John has his hand up for a while.
Let John Hunt speak. Come on.
Well, you were talking about the something broader about the situation behind it. We're one presidential election away from total constitutional collapse in this country. Just point that out.
Well, that statement might be true, but that statement depends once again on a willingness of the public to accept a constitutional collapse, whether people will read the law and follow the law, or decide they don't have to follow the law anymore. And I don't want to be partisan about this, but I look at the situation and I don't see both sides refusing to follow the law as consistent. There's a difference. And that's really the bottom line. Public has to demand our politicians follow the law in all cases. No, to use the word during the Biden administration, no one is above the law. The Democrats said this repeatedly. Well, that applies to them.
They will make the law.
Well, yeah, but the fact is, when the bottom line is the Constitution is the bottom line, and the Constitution overrules everything.
And that is what the Supreme Court says it is.
When you say constitutional collapse, you're referring to the Constitution.
After that.
Okay, guys, we're at 2 hours.
Too political, but
I really didn't want this to become political partisan. I'm just genuinely seeing the black.
I just said constitutional collapse.
Like Bob is.
We've known will be gone.
We're not at 2 hours. We are 1 hour and 2 minutes.
No, we're in 2 hours.
We started at 6 o'clock.
We started at 6 o'clock, AG, as the email said.
We're at 2 hours and 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I came late. I thought it was a 10 o'clock start.
You missed the best part, right?
AJ.
I just wanted Bob's prediction market value on who the dark side winning or the light side winning. So.
Well, from a historian's point of view, I'm giving you my schizophrenic perspective, which goes both ways, 100%. I don't know right now. I tell you, I don't sleep some nights worrying about the situation like you do. And there are other times where I completely refreshed and say, oh, things are good.
Yeah. By the way, Cornyn lost today, in the primary.
What? Yeah, well, I don't want to talk the specifics of politics. Because
I know I could get into this a little bit.
I'm talking general.
It's just a news item. It's just a news item. That's all.
I understand. I'm
not happy or unhappy. I'm not saying that.
I could bring up other political. I don't want to. I'm just giving you the overall historical perspective.
We do have one Texan here that might feel the need to vent. I don't know, but who's more likely to give us UFO information? I guess I could
Well,
ask.
that's John.
Oh.
John Hunt is the man. He's the one that's going to
Yeah,
do it.
no, I mean between Cornyn and the other guy. Who's our better UFO candidate, John?
Paxton or well,
Paxton
Cornyn's
or
gone, so Paxton or
So
because Paxton will win the Senate race.
Paxton or Tallarico? No.
Tallarico's not going to win that race in Texas. Trust me, he's not. I'm not, once again, not endorsing anyone.
You said something.
Well,
you said something political specifically.
I'm just
now,
giving you
know.
the reality. So if you want. All right. Well, now people will want to run for good reason. Goodbye, Jack.
Does anyone have any going
Yeah,
back
it's getting
to
late.
space,
I'm
any
gonna have to go
concluding
soon.
comments or anything they want to say? Because we're a little past even 2 hours.
Yeah.
Time to wrap it up.
People are talked out.
I mean, I think your last few questions there, David, about my overall historical perspective here was a great way to end the show. It was giving me a wider the sense. I can't say it enough. People should read my histories because they're good space histories. You learn a lot, but I'm taking it from a much wider context. I always look at the wider context, and that's something that we need if we're going to understand it. You don't have to agree with what I write, but it will definitely open your eyes to a lot of things you're not thinking about.
Marshall, you have a final word?
Yeah. Final question. Sunday, we had a bit of question about what test flight 12 payload was. And I went looking, and evidently SpaceX didn't divulge the exact payload. And
The weight,
kind of,
the mass, the weight.
the
mass.
mass of the
Okay.
payload. And I was just wondering, has anybody else found it?
Didn't look.
Okay.
Didn't look. No.
Didn't look. I didn't look either.
I didn't look.
It's not a priority in my mind.
The space, well, what we don't know is whether the mass simulators, the simulated Starlinks, are actually the correct mass for a Starlink V3 satellite.
Yeah.
If
And-
so, their Starlink V3 satellite is about 1,000 kilograms.
It's 2,000 kilograms for the version 3.
Right. Okay.
And-
So they launched 20 of those, and what I don't know is whether or not those simulators are actually the same weight as the satellites are, or whether they're the same weight as the V2s are.
From a purely engineering perspective, they would have to be if SpaceX is doing its work right. If they did anything else, they're not getting what they want, the data they need from the deployment
Right.
system. And I
So
can't
notice
imagine
they went from launching 8 of them to launching 20 of them
Right.
on this
22
mission.
actually, when you think about it.
Well, the other 2 were V2
But they-
satellites.
Yeah, but they still deployed 22
The
satellites.
Dodger dogs.
Yeah.
It's not devil dogs, by the way. It's Dodger.
Thank you. All right. Yeah. My memory is sometimes in another place. It's
I am not a Dodger fan, but I know what Dodger dogs are.
Can somebody,
And having eaten
We're getting
Dr.
political
Dogs.
again, you know.
so what, can somebody tell me what the dimensions are in feet of a Starlink?
number third version. That's an interesting question. This is definitely find outable. I bet on SpaceX's own website, they would be
Yeah,
able to give you that.
I wondered about that. Yeah, yeah.
If
I
you
just
go to
thought-
SpaceX and look at their Starlink version 3 things, I bet they will give you those
Well, I'm
specifications.
sure
Right.
you'd get it from Grok if you were really late.
Yeah, the V3 satellites are very heavy, like the Amazon Leo satellites are, because Amazon Leo more or less went for building the big high bandwidth satellite from the beginning, as opposed to launching what SpaceX did was they launched the lighter satellites with less bandwidth in order to get the service online. My son actually worked at Amazon Leo for a while, which is why I know some of that.
So how much is that? Like, is it 20 to 1, or is it 100 to 1, or what is the difference between that?
Well, the V3 Starlinks, I believe, are about twice as heavy as the existing V2. I believe they're called V2 minis or something. Which
Well, I wasn't talking about the size. I'm talking about the amount of data that they're able to.
that
send.
is on their website.
Okay.
The amount of bandwidth is much higher.
That's what I was
with the
thinking.
V3 satellite.
And
Yeah,
they brag about it.
Yeah,
They brag all the time about that.
Okay, cool.
David, I'm going to have to get off myself. So since if you guys want to keep
Thank
going,
you
we can, but
for
I think
it's time to
being
say
with us,
goodnight.
and everybody else, thank you. And remember,
you
there
all.
is no program on Friday, but we are back on Sunday, and we have a show coming up from Ecuador, which I've never done before. But anyway, May 31st, Sunday is open line, so any of these discussions and more can be continued if you guys want. So thank you all, and look forward.
Thank you all. Great stuff. Always great to do it with other people. I love it.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great, wonderful, safe week.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Quit
Thank
checking
you.
store for your sanity. So that's about one thing worth saying. Goodbye.